I'm Tony Northup, and if you've got a Canon 80D, this video is going to be really useful for you. It's a huge tutorial on how to use all the most important aspects of your camera. And if you already know some of this, just check the description below. There are links that allow you to skip forward to the parts of the tutorial that are meaningful to you, because I'm going to be going through the basic stuff and then getting into the more advanced stuff. If you have a different camera, you want to send a link to your friends, send them to sdp.io/tutorials. This has tutorials for just about every popular camera that's out today, so anybody should be able to find the help that they need there. I'm not going to be covering things like the special effects part of the camera, you know, the goofy kind of full color things and making things look miniaturized or whatever. I'm going to be focusing on the aspects of using this camera that are going to be really important to your photography and leaving out the more fluffy stuff. If you want to know about the other stuff, go ahead and have fun, but just refer back to your manual. I'm going to keep it on the basics because there's plenty to cover. First, the physical controls. And again, if you know this stuff, go ahead and skip forward. The most important thing is, well, you got to put your battery in first thing. There's a compartment here, slide this down, the door flips open, push this white lever, and the battery will pop out. You can slide it back in, put the rounded edge towards the rounded edge of the grip there, push it all the way in until it clicks, then pop it closed. This is your memory card, it lives in here. This is your digital film. Pull that back to flip it open. You're going to put an SD card in there. Any SD card should work just fine. The bigger the better, because you will fill up whatever SD card it is. We really like 128 gig or 256 gig SD cards. If you're shooting sports, wildlife, action, if you're holding down the continuous shutter and you're going to be taking a lot of pictures, you want to be sure to get a fast SD card. If you're not, if you take your time, if you take just 1, 2, or even 10 or 15 pictures at a time, go ahead and get a cheaper, slower SD card, but a bigger SD card, because you'll probably appreciate the capacity more than the speed. You'll see links throughout the video that will take you to Amazon that will allow you to just buy stuff. I'll get a few pennies if you happen to use those links. It just helps support the videos that we do here. I'll cover the ports on the camera over here. You'll see it has a variety of different ports. If you're shooting video, you'll care about the mic and the headphone jack. I'll suggest a mic later. Any traditional headphones will work just fine. There's a port down here for the remote shutter trigger. That will be useful if you're doing night photography. And this cover here covers up the USB and HDMI ports. You may never need to use those two things. The USB port is not useful for charging. However, you could copy pictures directly from the camera to your computer or assume some remote control. It's not that useful. I prefer to take the memory card out and put it into a memory card reader. It's just much, much faster to transfer your pictures that way, especially if you have a USB 3 memory card reader. The HDMI port is useful for hooking the camera up to a TV. If you want to do a slideshow, maybe back at your hotel room, you could show the vacation pictures to the rest of your family. But nowadays, people seem to just prefer to look at the back of the camera, so I don't find the HDMI port that useful. You could also hook up an external recorder if you were serious into video, but if you're that into video, you probably already know that you need it. First, I'll show you how to actually take a picture. You're going to put your lens on first. There's a knob over here that releases the lens. And when you first get your camera, the lens won't be attached, so you want to line up the white dot on the lens with the white dot on the body mount, put those two together, and then twist it clockwise until it clicks. I always twist it back, make sure it's on there rock solid. Now, flip the camera over to on here. You don't ever really need to turn this camera off. You can pretty much just leave it on all the time. It'll go into sleep. And that will allow you to start up a little faster, because turning it on kind of requires a second hand. I just leave the DSLRs on all the time. That's one of the great things about them. Now the camera's on. By default, it's set up to use the viewfinder here, so the screen won't come on by default. Hold it up to your eye, push the shutter halfway and it will focus, and then push it all the way to take a picture. If you actually want to use the screen on the back, like a smartphone, there's this dial right here. Make sure it's pointed at the camera button and then click Start Stop. And that will make the live view screen come on. As before, it will just autofocus when you push the shutter button halfway and you could take a picture. It's very intuitive. You can also touch on here to take a picture and refocus. To review your pictures, really simple. Hit the play button on the back above the dial here, and then you can just flip through with your finger. I find it the easiest way to do is just to treat it like a smartphone. If you want to see thumbnails, pinch in like that. You can pinch in a couple of times and then browse through it. And then if you feel like zooming in, you can just pull it apart, just like your smartphone. You can also use the buttons up here to zoom in and out if you want to, and you can scroll through with the wheel here. So whether you feel like using physical controls or the touchscreen, those are both available to you. You can see different information by hitting the info button up here. So you can see this will tell me the ISO that the picture was taken with, the f-stop, the shutter speed, all that sort of useful information. And if I zoom all the way back out, I can see even more information when I hit the info button, like the histogram, which I cover in my book. Chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography will show you how to use that. It's really important for understanding the exposure of your picture. You can see, I can even flip through here as I have that open. Shows you all the settings too. If you use the viewfinder rather than the live view screen, you should know about the diopter here. The diopter basically dials in a glasses prescription. So if you're a glasses wearer, you can hold this up to your eye and then twist this until everything in the viewfinder looks sharp. You want to be looking at the numbers at the bottom of the display and just get it until it's nice and clear, just like you're at the doctor's office and he's giving you that vision test. Now, it's really important to know this even if you're not a glasses wearer, because this diopter will get hit accidentally once in a while. It'll just get twisted in your bag. And then you'll hold it up to your eye and you'll think your camera just won't focus because everything is blurry. If the numbers are blurry, it's the diopter. Just hold it up and twist that. That can be a lifesaver. I get a lot of emails from people saying their camera won't focus. I'll show you my favorite mode on a camera, which is Aperture Priority. And Aperture Priority it's the right mode for a lot of just day-to-day shooting. It's definitely the right mode for things like usually portraits and landscapes are shot in Aperture Priority. Now, when you get your camera, it's probably going to be on this green box, the auto mode. And that's okay. Anytime you get nervous, if you can't remember the difference between Aperture Priority and Shutter Priority or what an f-stop is, just switch over to the green mode and take pictures. That's your safe place. Go back there, focus on the lighting and the composition and the mood and the storytelling and all the important stuff. But when you start to get into camera settings, you will want to know where Aperture Priority is. On Canon cameras, it's marked with an AV. So I'll push this center button in and then twist this. That center button just makes it so it doesn't accidentally turn. Older cameras didn't have that and they would accidentally turn it and it would mess you all up. Now that I'm in Aperture Priority mode, we can kind of explore the f-stop of this lens. Now, this kit lens, you can see on the front here, it says f3.5 to 5.6. Those are the lowest f-stop numbers that this lens supports. So this lens goes down to f3.5 when it's at the minimum zoom at f18. And when I zoom into f135 or to 135 millimeters, it's at the higher f-stop number, f5.6. Those are the minimum, so I can always go higher, like I can go to f16 or f22. And that's what Aperture Priority lets you do. It lets you change the f-stop. So you can see right now the camera's at 5.6. It shows it right there on the LCD screen. Or if I hit the info button here, I can view, I'll hit it a couple of times. I can view it on the display here. You can see f5.6. If I twist this main dial, I can adjust that. So now you can see f11, f13, f15, f22. Whatever number I change it to, that's the f-stop number that the camera is going to use. So let's explore why you'd want to do it. Well, first, visit this link, sdp.io/fstop, for a full tutorial on exactly what Aperture Priority is. I'm going to kind of cross-reference some of my other videos so that I don't have to kind of show every aspect of photography to you. But if you're interested in Aperture Priority, check out that video. It will teach you a lot. When you adjust the f-stop number, here's what physically happens in your lens. You can see at f2 or any low f-stop number, the opening is as wide as it can be. And then as you use higher and higher f-stop numbers, the opening gets smaller and smaller. Of course, the smaller hole lets less light in. So your camera will need to compensate for that by, say, leaving the shutter speed, using a longer shutter speed to allow the same total amount of light to come in. Besides the amount of light that gets in, the other side effect is what we call the depth of field, also known as the background blur. So at low f-stop numbers, you have a very blurry background, like the example here on the left, which was shot at f1.8. The example in the middle here is at f8, and if you compare those two pictures, you can see the one shot at f8 has a much cleaner background. You can just make out much more detail. And then when I came all the way up to f22, you can see the cars and the buildings in the background are perfectly sharp. So this helps to illustrate exactly why you might want to change your f-stop number. But again, we have a full video dedicated to everything about Aperture at sdp.io/fstop. So check it out. Now you know how to change it on your camera. The hard part is actually understanding the kind of mechanics of it. Another really important mode is shutter priority. Now, people seem to think that when you take a picture, the camera, it happens in an instant, but the shutter's open for a period of time. It could be 1/4000th of a second, or it could be 1/60th of a second more typically. It could also be half a second or 10 seconds. You have control over the shutter speed. And there are a lot of times when you're going to want to take control of it. If you're shooting sports, for example, the camera might, if you have it in aperture priority mode, it might set the shutter speed to 1/60th or something. And that would be fine for taking pictures of your kid's birthday party, but it's not fine for taking pictures of your kid's basketball game. Everybody's going to be blurry. So in that case, you take control of the shutter and you tell the camera to use a faster shutter by putting the camera in shutter priority mode, which is set using the TV value on the mode dial here. It's like time value. And now, the same main dial that I used before, instead of controlling the f-stop number, now it will control the shutter speed. So in the top dial here, you can see it to the left, it's set to 100 now, 80, 60, 50, 40, 30. And you can also see it on the back here. So most of the time for general shooting, you'll be shooting at maybe 1/60th or 1/30th are pretty good. You always want to use the slowest shutter speed you can. That will cancel out the shake of your camera and the movement of your subject. If you go too slow, your pictures get blurry. But if you go too fast, then your camera will have to use a higher and higher ISO setting. I'll talk about that in a second, but it'll make your pictures noisier. But just the slower shutter speed you can use is the best thing to use. If we go up to the range of 1/250th of a second, that's pretty good for kids' sports. As they get older, as they get into high school or college, 1/500th will start to yield more and more sharp results. You might even have to go up to 1/1000th. If you're shooting flying birds, I like to be at 1/1500th or 1/2000th of a second, so somewhere up here. And above that, you're kind of in the realm of like hummingbirds, 1/8000th of a second. There aren't too many things that require 1/8000th of a second, but hummingbird wings happen to be one of them. If you do some night photography, which is a lot of fun, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, you want to use a really long shutter speed for, especially if you're out away from the city. But if you're in the city, often you can get by with 1/4 of a second or half a second. Now notice how the shutter speed is displayed. It's been in fractions, and then we get to half a second and it's 0.5. It's just like 0.5 seconds. And then once we get to a second and longer, it starts showing it as like a quote sign indicating full seconds instead of fractions of the seconds. It does the same thing on the top display here. When you do get into night photography, you should know this button here lights up the display. Teach your finger that in case you forget anything else, everything else, hit that one button and that'll help you get your settings dialed in. For detailed information about shutter, speed, as well as all the other camera settings, go to sdp.io/settings and I'll help you find the right shutter speed. But here's an example of the difference of choosing different shutter speeds. On the left, we have a slow shutter speed of 1/8 of a second, while I'm on one of those spinny things in the playground opposite my daughter. And you can see she's moving with me, so she's sharp, but the background is really blurred. It's completely panned because we're both spinning. And then I speed up the shutter to 1/30th of a second, and you can see it's not nearly as panned. The movement is much smaller. And then at 1/125th, that's enough to basically freeze our motion. And now the background looks pretty sharp. So if you want to freeze motion, that's one of the things you're going to be looking for, is you'll be going through this and you'll say, oh, 1/8 is blurry, 1/30th is blurry, 1/125th, that's perfect. So sometimes you won't always know what shutter speed you should be using, but a little bit of experimentation can tell you. If you want to control both the aperture and the shutter speed at the same time, use manual mode. Manual mode is indicated by an M here on the mode dial. So I'll select the M, and now the main dial here still controls the shutter speed. You can see it here. As I move that, the shutter speed changes. And the secondary dial on the back controls the f-stop number. And this allows you to adjust both the shutter speed and the f-stop. And this is just, if you get comfortable dialing in your settings, you'll use manual mode all the time. The camera will still auto expose just fine. You won't be making pictures brighter or darker or ruining anything too badly, because right now I have the camera in auto ISO. I'll discuss that in just a little bit. But manual mode, the camera still is doing some auto exposure for you. The link here, sdp.io/go manual, has a tutorial that will help you figure out all of your camera settings if you decide that you do want to shoot in manual mode. Before we go on, I just want to take a second and plug my books, because that's kind of what funds buying these cameras and creating these tutorials. My book, Stunning Digital Photography, is the #1 selling photography book for the last several years. And it's really popular. Go to Amazon and check out the reviews. People really like it. It's not just a book, but it has now over 14 hours of video integrated into it. So you read, you watch some videos, you can take an online test to make sure that you learn stuff. You can participate in our online groups, which have tens of thousands of people also learning photography. Also really helpful. They can help answer your questions and give you feedback on your pictures and stuff. And I'll be there too, helping out whenever I can. It's the best way to learn photography, and it's literally $9.99 for the electronic version or $19.99 for the paperback version. So go to Amazon and pick it up, or you can visit our store. We ship worldwide at sdp.io/store. If you get into post-processing and editing, check out my Lightroom book and my Photoshop book. If you have questions about which lens to buy, which flash to buy, which accessories to buy, check out my photography buying guide. It's a whole book that just helps you get the most bang for your buck, shopping used, things like that. And finally, if the idea of reading a book sounds terrible to you, if you'd rather just watch videos, I have a video training series for beginning photography that you can pick up either at Amazon or at my store here. That's all. I'll move on. Just wanted to just give a quick plug. Night photography is taking pictures at night, and not everybody knows you can even take night photography pictures, but it's really fun because you most of the time you need to use a tripod, and the pictures can take several seconds, but it tends to be very peaceful. Instead of kind of running around and shooting quickly, you're moving slowly and you're really thinking through your thoughts, and you also have some quiet time to just kind of relax and enjoy the night. Most of the time you'll be shooting in manual mode, and you'll be looking at your histogram to make sure the exposure is okay, because no camera really auto exposes well at night. But for detailed information, again, I'm going to cross-reference you to a different video. Go to sdp.io/np to learn more about night photography. There's a series of videos there. These are linking to playlists. Same thing for landscape photography. We have a series of videos that can help you out. They're completely free. Go to sdp.io/ls. And finally, if you're into wildlife photography, our series of free tutorials are at sdp.io/wl, so enjoy those. The next mode I want to talk about is bulb mode. Bulb mode allows you to keep your shutter open for more than 30 seconds, because manual mode, for some reason, is limited to 30 seconds. But if you put it into bulb mode, you can keep your shutter open indefinitely. So on the mode dial here, there's a B. Set it to the B, and now, this is really weird, but the shutter will stay open for as long as I have my finger held down on the shutter button here. So I'll hold it down. You can hear it. It stays open for as long as I have it held down. And on the little display here, you can see it's counting up the number of seconds that I have it held down. So you don't often need to shoot for longer than 30 seconds. But if you're doing night photography in a rural area, like under stars, if there's not a moon out, you might need to take a picture for 5 minutes or 10 minutes to get a proper exposure at a nice low ISO. And that's what you would do. But you probably wouldn't literally stand there with your finger held on the button for 5 minutes, because you'd shake the camera and you'd get bored. So instead, what you would do is you would pick up a remote shutter trigger and plug it into here. And what I would do is go to Amazon and search for remote shutter timer 80D or 70D. It uses the same one, same trigger. And don't spend more than 20 bucks. Don't get the fancy Canon version, get a generic version. That's the one that I use, and it works just fine. Now let's talk about the different shutter modes. The shutter modes make the difference between taking one picture or a bunch of pictures. So I'll switch this back into Aperture Priority mode. And you can see, if I hold the button down, it takes just one picture. But if you're shooting sports, you might want it to be like blam, 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 blam. So hit the drive button on the top here. And then you can see it lights up the display on the back. Move the main dial over and select high speed continuous. This is just my favorite mode. That's what I use most of the time. I just leave it in that. There you go. Nice and fast, right? It's a very fast camera. It's fantastic for sports and wildlife. And if it's your kid's birthday party and you want to take one picture, just let go of the shutter button. I don't even know why it defaults to single shot, because the very first tip in stunning digital photography is take lots of pictures and delete most of them, because if it's your kid's birthday party, they're gonna go through like multiple different kind of micro expressions in the span of a second. They'll smile naturally, and then they'll smile uncomfortably, and then maybe they'll blink. If you rattle off 3 pictures, the odds of you getting that perfect moment are a lot better. Anytime the subject's moving, it helps to just take a couple of pictures, but then just pick the very best one of them. So for that reason, I almost always use high-speed shutter. This same drive button gives you access to a delayed shutter, and you'll see 2 different versions of the delayed shutter. One is this first one here. Hit that drive button again. That's the self-timer for 10 seconds. So when I select that and I take a picture, you can see it beeps, the yellow light blinks for a little while, and now it's counting down a full 10 seconds. And this is useful for those times when you're taking a self-portrait with the family and you have the camera on a tripod and you're gonna like run around the camera and put your arm around your family and get the camera to take a picture of you. That's what it's for. It gives you 10 seconds. Another self-timing option is this one over here. It's the 2-second timer. And this is useful, again, pretty much for night photography or macro photography. It eliminates the shake of you pushing the shutter button when you have the camera on a tripod. So if I push that, you can see it beeps for 2 seconds and then it takes it. When you push the shutter button, you won't think about it most of the time, but you're actually shaking the camera a little bit because you're pushing on it. And if you want the sharpest picture possible and you have your camera on a tripod, then putting that 2-second delay will let that shake kind of dissipate before the camera actually takes the picture. It'll just result in a sharper picture. Now, anytime you go into one of those self-timer modes, the last thing you want to do after you've taken your picture is to go back to high-speed continuous. Otherwise, the next time you'll grab your camera real quick because there'll be like a fox running through your yard and you want to get a picture of it, but you'll forget that you had it on the 10-second timer and you go to take a picture and the camera won't take a picture. As a general rule, reset any changes you make back to the original setting when you're done shooting. Your future self will thank you because you won't be screwing up a picture. The camera also has a bunch of different focusing modes, and by default what will happen is you'll push the shutter halfway and the camera will lock on to the subject's face and then stop trying to focus. That's great for still subjects. It's a very precise type of focusing. It works pretty well for general usage. However, if you get into lenses that have a shallow depth of field, or you get into moving subjects, things like sports, the continuous focusing will tend to work a little bit better. So this first button here on the left, the AF button, I'll push that and it brings up the 3 different options. And there's only 2 you really need to care about. One shot is that default. Focus on something, stop focusing. AI servo means just keep trying to focus. If the subject moves, it's going to be tracking it automatically. As long as you have the shutter button pushed halfway, the camera will keep trying to refocus. And the middle option here, AI focus, AI means artificial intelligence. This doesn't really have AI, not like the movie Her. It's just going to try to decide for you whether the subject is still or moving, and it works okay. But it's only for people who don't know how to change between one focus and AI servo, and now you know that, right? So you can just pick AI servo for moving subjects and be done with it. If you want to know more about focusing modes, go to sdp.io/focus. This camera has a really awesome continuous autofocus system. So you can just pretty much use continuous autofocus all the time, especially if you set up back button focusing, which I'll discuss in just a little bit. You can also select between different focusing areas. So by default, the camera will focus on everything all at once. You might want to be careful about focusing on, for example, the nearest eye in portrait photography. And so instead of letting the camera decide where in the frame to focus, you'll pick a specific focusing point. That's really easy to change. There's this button here right next to the shutter button. Push that, and you can see it gives you the option between 45-point AF, a large zone AF where it focuses anywhere in the middle, multi-zone AF where it focuses in a block, but you can move that block around, or my favorite, 1-point AF. I like to be pretty precise about where I focus. So I pretty much always use the 1-point AF. I'll push that again. That just makes sure that the camera does exactly what I say, because I don't like the camera to be making its own decisions. I will say if you're shooting flying birds against a blue sky, the group AF will work much, much better. So for flying birds in the woods, I would use 1-point AF. For portraits, I'd use 1-point AF. For sports, I would use 1-point AF. But for flying birds against a blue sky, I would probably use zone AF or even 45 point AF, because it can be hard to keep the bird exactly on your focusing point as it's moving around and you're looking through a telephoto lens. So this gives you some margin for error. If the bird moves a little bit, the camera will do a pretty good job of keeping up with it. So if you followed my advice and you use the single point AF like this, you'll want to move that focusing point around. And I'm going to show you how to change a custom setting. Now, without changing the custom setting, you could push this button here. You can see it's got like a little diagram of different focusing points. And once you push that, you can then use the directional pad here to move it around. But I hate that extra button push. I hate having to go like that and then go like that. So I like to just be able to push these and have it move the focusing point. There's a really simple setting that you change to do that. So I'll hit the menu button, get under this like camera with lines under it. The icons are never real clear to me. And then choose custom function 3 here, operations other. And what you'll want to do is select that and then select this option and turn on direct AF point selection. And what that'll let you do is it'll allow you to directly change the focusing points when you have single focus point turned on by just doing this without hitting an extra button. ISO controls, basically it controls the sensitivity of your camera sensor to light. So a low ISO is good for taking pictures in bright light, and high ISO will brighten up the picture if you're shooting in really low light conditions. And with a really high ISO on this camera, you can definitely take pictures with a fairly fast shutter speed, even at night, especially in the city. But it's a good idea to use the lowest ISO you can, because that will give you the cleanest images. Because the side effect of using a high ISO for dim environments is you get a lot of noise. Those like red, green, and blue kind of sprinkles that you see everywhere that make your picture kind of ugly. If you want to know more about ISO, I'm going to cross-reference you to a different video again. Go to sdp.io/ISO. That teaches you everything about ISO, including why I'm saying ISO and not ISO. Yes, I even covered the pronunciation of ISO. I'm going to show you how to change it on this camera. By default, it's set to auto ISO. And that's all you need to know is auto ISO is fine for most people, most situations. Hit the ISO button here. ISO, and then you can use the main dial to change it. You can see it's changing on the LCD up here, or you can look at the screen at the back. And the highest it'll go by default is 12,800. So I'll go all the way to the left. Even as a pro, I'll usually use auto ISO unless it's night photography, unless I'm in a studio. By default, the camera imposes some kind of artificial limits on your ISO settings, but you can go in and increase them. So I'll hit the menu button. This is something I suggest you do. And then under camera, page 2, I'll go to ISO speed settings. I'll select that, and here you can see range for stills. The minimum should always be 100, and then the maximum, you can increase that up to 25,600. So that'll be useful in case you ever need to shoot in dimmer environments. You can also change the auto range, and I don't see any reason not to increase the auto range up to a maximum of ISO 1600. So I'll click OK. And yes, when you use a high ISO like that, things are going to become really noisy, but it's better than not getting a properly exposed picture. The easiest way to control the brightness of your picture is to use exposure compensation. So if you ever take a picture and your subject's face is too dark, or they're overexposed if they're too bright, you can fix that. And it's probably the single most important skill to develop. I'll tell you all about it at this cross-reference video, sdp.io/EC, but I'll show you how to use the control on your camera. So if you're in program mode, which I didn't really talk about because you don't need it, shutter priority or aperture priority, this secondary dial here is exposure compensation. So you can see as I'm scrolling it to the right, see this chart right here? 0 means you're just using the camera's auto exposure. It will expose whatever it thinks is right for the scene. Go to the right and the scene will get brighter and brighter and brighter. 1, 2, and 3 mean 1 stop, 2 stops, 3 stops. Each stop is a doubling or a halving of the light. You can also make your picture darker by going to -1 stops, -2 stops, or -3 stops. So if I turn on live view here, we can see this in real time. Here's the exposure compensation chart down here. Now, right now it's at 0, and you can see the screen itself looks kind of gray. Because I'm taking a picture of a bright subject, I usually have to add some exposure compensation to make sure those whites are nice and bright. So I'll bring that up to like +2 stops, and you can see now it's much brighter. If I keep going to the right, it actually ends up a little too bright. I could go down and make it darker and darker and darker. There are situations where you'd want to do that, like if you were photographing a really brightly colored subject. As with other settings, if you change the exposure compensation, scroll it back to 0 before you put the camera down. Otherwise, the next time you pick up the camera, it's gonna screw up the exposure for you. You will not see a preview of the exposure compensation when you're looking through the viewfinder here. You will see it if you use live view. It's one of the really nice things about using live view. Using live view is a great way to kind of figure out exposure settings. This camera has Wi-Fi built in, so you can quickly get your pictures from your camera to your smartphone, and then from your smartphone to Instagram or Twitter. Now, I'll show you how to do it. I have a Samsung Android phone, but it works pretty similar to the iPhone, and I'll explain the differences to you. This camera does have NFC built into it. That's this logo right here. Okay, your first step, hit the menu button, and then under the wrench icon, page 1, go to Wireless Communication Settings. Under Wi-Fi NFC, select that, and then select Enable. And you probably want to make sure that Allow NFC Connections is turned on. So this phone has NFC. Okay, so next I'll fire up the Camera Connect app, and I'm going to rub it on the camera here, and you can see they detected each other through NFC, and now it's saying connect to the smartphone, and the phone's doing stuff. You just have to kind of confirm it on the camera. I'll click OK. Now the connection is established, so I have a couple of options here. I can view the images on the camera, I can do remote shooting, or I can change the camera settings. I think what I usually do is I view the images on the camera, and then you can see all the pictures I took today, and now I can select a picture and click this button at the bottom to transfer it over to my phone. So it just saved the image. So now unfortunately, there's just not an easy way to then share it on Facebook or Twitter or whatever. So I saved it, but now I can go into Instagram, and there it is, ready to be shared. So you can see it's not instantaneous, but it's pretty quick. You can pretty quickly get it over there. Let me switch back to the Camera Connect app, and I'll show you the other features. I'll go back by pushing up here and then go all the way home. Remote shooting lets you kind of see through it. So you can see, oh, there's my cameraman, Justin. See if we can get the camera in focus. Wait, maybe it'll focus this way. So I can touch the focus and then push this to take a picture, and then you can quickly review your pictures from here. And finally, the third option here is camera settings. So this is really helpful, I can synchronize the time by selecting reflect the date time of this device, because it's such a pain to like go in and set the right time on it. So I'll just do set to camera, and bam, it's all synced up. It's especially useful when you travel because your phone will probably automatically set the new time. The only difference between using an Android device and an iPhone device is that iPhones generally don't have NFC. So what you'll have to do is turn on Wi-Fi on your phone, and then on your iPhone, you'll browse Wi-Fi networks, and you'll see that Wi-Fi network coming from the phone, from the camera, and you'll connect to your camera's Wi-Fi. And then when you're done, you'll have to disconnect from the Wi-Fi. RAW versus JPEG. Your camera can shoot in 2 different file formats. JPEG is the default, and it's what most people use and share. Everything that goes on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram is going to be a JPEG file. RAW files capture a ton more information. They produce higher quality images, often sharper images. And if you shoot RAW, you can kind of make up for a mistake. If you underexpose or overexpose a picture, it's really easy to fix with a RAW file. If you want to know all the deets about RAW versus JPEG, go to sep.io/RAWVJPEG. Sounds like a court case almost. I'll just show you how to actually change it. I'll hit the menu button here, and I'll go over to the shooting menu. It's the very first option. That's how important it is. By default, it shows high quality JPEGs. large JPEG. So I'm going to turn the JPEG images off. I'm going to set it to full RAW here, and then I have to be sure to click set after I'm done to set it. So now my camera is shooting RAW instead of JPEG. If you use an app like the free Picasa app or Lightroom, Picasa's been discontinued, but Lightroom is still a good way to process those. You won't even know the difference. You'll just have higher quality images that will allow you to fix problems. Anyway, I highly recommend shooting RAW. A lot of people do, but if you shoot JPEG, that's fine too. Metering modes on the camera. This changes how your camera looks at the scene and decides what the brightness should be. So it can look at just the center part of the scene, or it can take in the entire scene. And the default setting is fine. I literally never change the metering mode on any of my cameras. I leave it at the default, but then I use exposure compensation as necessary, and that's just my preferred way of shooting. I discussed it in chapter 4 of Stunning Digital Photography if you want to know more. I'll just show you how to change it on this camera. It's this fourth button here on the top. That's the metering mode. And then you can select between evaluated metering, partial metering, spot metering, or center weighted average. But again, evaluated metering works fine for me. And by the way, I'm kind of showing you where the buttons are because that is just easier to me. But if you forget where stuff is, you can always hit this Q button here. And this will allow you to kind of browse through the different options and see what each means. It accomplishes the exact same thing as pushing the physical buttons, but maybe that's easier for you to remember. Now let's talk about using a flash. This camera has what we call a hot shoe for putting a flash in it. So you can mount a flash in like this, and this will give you much better results. I'll suggest a flash at the end of this video when I suggest accessories. It also has a built-in flash, which will almost always produce terrible results. There's a flash button over here. I'll push that and it'll pop up. And this flash, like I said, it's going to be really bad because the flash is really close to the lens and it's a really small light source. So you get that flash look where everybody's kind of like, oh, I'm blinded and the lighting is really hard. An off-camera flash, especially if it's bounced, will produce much better results. I discuss it in chapter 3 of Stunning Digital Photography. Yes, there's much more information about flash. I do want to show you how to use the flash exposure compensation. Because if you are going to use this, you'll probably get better results by turning down the flash exposure compensation. It works just like regular exposure compensation makes the picture brighter or darker. Flash exposure compensation increases or decreases the output of the flash. So the easiest way to get to the flash exposure compensation is to hit this Q button here. And then, where is it? It's up here. It's the lightning bolt with the plus or minus. That's the international symbol for flash exposure compensation. So if I go down to -2 here, it will do 2 stops less of flash output, with 2 stops being 1/4. If I do -1, it will do 1 stop less. I get the best results on average at about -1 1/3. That means the camera will be using the ambient light more. It won't put out quite as much flash, so people won't be quite as blinded. But again, as always, after you're done, you might want to reset it back to 0. I just wanted to show you where that was. White balance is another thing that I personally don't ever need to change. I leave it on auto white balance, and because I shoot RAW, I can always fix it later. But if you decide you want to manually change the white balance, I'll always tell you what it is. White is not always white. Like this table is white. And if I had it under incandescent lamps, it would look white. And if I had it out in the full sun, it would look white. But here's the thing, the sun is, well, it's what we consider to be white, but incandescent lights are not actually white, they're a little bit yellow. So if you look at something white under incandescent lights, it's actually a little bit yellow. LEDs are a little bit blue. So if I looked at this table under LEDs, it would actually be a little bit blue. But your brain doesn't see it that way because your brain has an automatic white balance setting. It's figuring out, I'm under blue lights. I'm going to make all stuff that's blue look white. Your camera does that too. Sometimes your camera's not as smart as your brain though. So you might take pictures that have a yellow tint to them, or a green tint, or a blue tint. Like I said, auto white balance, pretty good. And then you can always fix it in RAW. But if you decide you do want to change the white balance, hit the Q button and then go to this middle row, second column. Right now it says AWB for auto white balance. I'll select that and then I can just pick the lighting that I'm under. Shade, cloudy, tungsten, whatever happens to match my current situation. Again, set that back to auto white balance once you're done, or all your pictures are going to have a funny tint. If you really want to get precise about it, select this middle one, and then you can really dial in the exact color. Let's talk about video. This is an awesome video camera. It's got this articulating screen that flips out, and that means you can touch to focus. The first thing you do to activate video mode is to flip the switch from the camera to the video. That makes the screen come on. You can see that it's now cropped to 16:9, just like most TVs. And little things like I can touch to focus here. When you want to start recording, hit the start stop button and it will start recording. Now, that's really all there is to it. You can push the shutter halfway and it'll try to focus it for you just like it always will. It'll also keep up with different focusing modes. You can see right now it's in servo AF. You can turn that on or off by touching it. When it's green like that, servo AF means it's going to track focus. You can adjust the exposure compensation up or down while it's recording. This might shake the camera, and it definitely makes some noise that'll be picked up on the on-camera mic. So if you want to be silent about it, touch that, and then you can just do that. And you can see it doesn't shake the camera nearly as much, and it doesn't make any sound at all. Then hit that to go back. So I'll stop recording for a bit and then show you how to change the settings. I prefer to do this with the Q button here. So I'll push the Q button, and then you can see, you can choose between all the different settings. By default, the AF method is face detection, which is generally useful. It will look for faces in the scene and focus on the face. You can also select FlexiZone Multi or FlexiZone Single. You can see in FlexiZone Single, it lets you kind of scroll around and pick your focusing point. So you're doing the thinking instead of the camera. I'll set that back. The movie record size, this is something you'll probably want to change. By default, it's set to Full HD, which is 1080p, and 30 frames a second, basically. 2997 is basically 30 frames a second. I really like 60 frames a second. So there's also the option for 5994p, which records twice as many frames. And go to YouTube and look up 60 frames a second video, 60 FPS. It's so nice and smooth when you see it. There's just a little quality about it. You can definitely see the difference. It just looks better than 30 frames a second. Or if you're doing editing, you could also slow it down to 30 frames a second and do basically 2x slow motion. It's a nice effect. So after the Q button, this fourth icon here is the headphones. This does not change the audio levels being recorded. It just changes what you hear in your headphones. If you want to change the actual audio levels, go to the menu and then under camera, page 4, go to sound recording. You can see by default it's set to auto. Auto is almost never, well, it's right for the most casual of shooting, but if you care about your sound at all, you're probably going to want to switch it to manual and then go to the recording level here and adjust it up or down so that you're not getting any peaks, so that the peaks are in the yellow here. So you can see if I adjust it all the way up, that's adding just a bunch of gain, and now I'm just peaking all the time, and that's no good, so I want to just kind of bring it down here, and that's probably pretty good levels. I'm in the yellow sometimes, but I'm never going all the way to the red. And then click set there. The best thing you can do for your video is to put it on a tripod. That'll help eliminate any camera shake. And if you are hand holding it, make sure you have a lens with image stabilization like this one. You can see stabilizer on. That'll help smooth out your videos some. Also avoid zooming when you're recording. Another tip, your memory card here acts like digital film and it will eventually fill up. When it does fill up, you can reuse it. Put it inside your computer, unload all your pictures, back those pictures up somewhere else, and then you can reformat the memory card and get a whole fresh use out of it. Hit the menu button here, and then go over to the wrench icon and the fourth item down on page 1, format card. I'll select that, and then I'll select OK, and then you can see when I hit set, it formats everything on the card. Now the card is completely clear and ready to be used. If you accidentally format it or something bad happens to your memory card, like it gets corrupted, there's a free tool that will save your pictures. Go to sdp.io/photorec. If you just search for recover lost pictures, you'll find a bunch of apps trying to sell you something for 50 or 60 bucks. This one's free. Most of those paid tools are just based on this tool. So just go right to the source, get it. I've used it a few times. It has saved my butt. Now, most cameras beep when you just get them, and that beep is terribly annoying to somebody like myself who shoots weddings because everybody in the audience is like, beep, 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 beep. It's supposed to be quiet. Anyway, I would love it if everybody would turn the beep off on their camera. You'll still get a visual confirmation when you focus. The beep, nobody likes it. Hit the menu button and then on camera, page 1, the third item down here, beep. Set that to disable. And thank you. Another really useful feature of this camera is the interval timer, which will take pictures on a recurring basis. This is useful for creating a time lapse if you want to do that. It's also useful for scenarios where, like self-portraits. Instead of setting the timer, what I'll actually do is I'll turn on the interval timer and tell the camera to take 20 pictures. And then I can just run around and we'll just pose for 20 pictures and then I can pick the very best one. It's a lot easier than running back and forth and back and forth. So to turn on the interval timer, I'll hit the menu button. And then on camera page 4, the top option there is interval timer. So I'll select that and then select OK. Now, with that selected, this is really confusing. You have to now hit the info button. You can see down here it says info detail set. So I'll hit the info button and this will allow me to control the interval and the number of shots. So for the purposes of a self-portrait, I usually set the interval to about 5 seconds. That means it'll take a shot every 5 seconds and that gives people time to kind of reposition and pose and smile again. And after 3 to 4 shots, people will kind of figure out the meter of the shots and they'll begin posing and you'll have a good time with it. Then for the number of shots, well, you could just set it to the maximum amount because you can interrupt it at any time. So I'll set it to 0 unlimited. And then I'll go down and select OK here. And now the next time I go to take a picture, the interval timer will start and you can see it's just going to shoot every 5 seconds. And then when you're done shooting with it, you can just shut the camera off. If you ever shoot macro photography or you're doing any sort of photography on a tripod and you want the sharpest possible picture, Mirror Lockup will give that to you. All SLR cameras have a mirror inside of them. It's that guy there, that kind of diagonal thing there, and it bounces light up to the viewfinder. And when you take a picture, it has to move out of the way. You can see that. And it's got some mass to it. It's kind of a big thing, and it will shake the whole camera by just a little bit. And that mirror shake will reduce the sharpness of your pictures. You don't need to worry about it all the time. But if you're on a tripod anyway, and you want sharp pictures, it will definitely improve the sharpness of your pictures. So if you go into live view, you can see it flips out of the way. I'm in live view now. And then you don't have to worry about mirror lockup. But if you're using the viewfinder and you want the sharpest pictures possible, go to the menu, camera, page 4, and then down to mirror lockup here and turn that on. And now the next time you take a picture, you can see it moves the mirror out of the way the first time you push the shutter, and then it takes the picture on the second time. Now, that's a silly way to do it because you have to push the shutter the second time to make the camera fire. And when you push the shutter, it shakes the camera. So use mirror lockup with a remote shutter release for best results. Or better yet, just use a delayed shutter, like a 2-second delayed shutter with the mirror lockup, and you'll be happiest with it. Now let's talk about back button focus. Back button focus is a technique that I find really useful for almost every type of photography. Instead of having the camera focus when you push the shutter button halfway, it will focus when I push the AF on button. Therefore, anytime I'm shooting, I have my finger here, my thumb here, and I'm pushing this to focus and then pushing this all the way to actually shoot. And this allows me to keep the camera in continuous focus all the time, AI servo, rather than switching between one shot and AI servo. It also allows me to quickly do focus and recompose without having to refocus each and every time I go to shoot, because the camera only refocuses when I push the AF on button. That also means for photography like night photography, where focusing might be difficult to attain, you don't have to worry about automatically refocusing the camera every time you take the picture. If you're interested in why back button focus is useful, go to sdp.io/YBB. I have a whole video there for you. I'm just going to show you how to turn it on for now. Hit the menu button and then go over to this custom camera settings here and then do Operation Others, CFN3. This allows you to customize the buttons. So you might find other things you want to customize. But for now, what we're going to do is to select that. And then this first item here, by default, it's set to metering and AF start. So we're going to set it to just metering start. Metering is the camera kind of figuring out the scene's brightness. We're turning off the AF start. So now AF start is not connected to this shutter button. It's decoupled. But you can see under AF on, this still says AF. So that's the default. You don't have to change that. So now When I push it halfway, it will not focus. It will only focus when I do this. The only other thing I suggest changing is going to the AF mode and setting it to AI servo. Then you should never have to touch those settings again. Back button focus does take a little bit of getting used to, but it's really useful. Another useful way to customize your camera is to use My Menu. I have a hard time remembering which of these many pages different useful settings are on. So I like to use My Menu, which is under the star here, and put the most commonly accessed tools. So I'll click OK here to add a My Menu tab, and then I'll select Configure here. And so now what I'll do is I'll choose Select Items to Register to add those settings that I change most frequently. So I know one of them that I change a lot or that I select often is the interval timer. That's really useful. Interval timer lets you take multiple pictures in a row. Another one I like is Mirror Lockup. Mirror Lockup is useful for shooting macro photography. And then another one I use is Format Card, because I often format my memory cards. So now I have 3 items on My Menu, and you can see I can access those just like I would if I were accessing them directly in the individual pages, but I don't have to flip through all those pages. It's a blessing. Once you start taking pictures, you're going to need help organizing your pictures and doing light editing. And the single best way to do that is with Adobe Lightroom. It's not free. You can try it out for 30 days, decide if you like it, but then it costs you $10 a month with Photoshop. But that is pretty much all the photo editing software you'll ever need. You can also just flat out buy Lightroom for like $100 or something. Anyway, go to sdp.io/Adobe deal, and you can pick it up there. I don't know how I live without Adobe Lightroom. It's a pain that you have to buy some software, but once you have more than a dozen pictures, you're going to really be happy you have something there helping you edit and organize your pictures, and it'll do a lot to improve your photography by allowing you to edit it. I'm going to suggest a few hardware accessories for your new camera. One of the most important is buying a second battery. Your camera comes with a battery and charger, but at some point you're going to be out in the field and your battery is going to die on you, and then that's going to be the end of your picture taking. And if that's upsetting to you, then you should pick up a second battery, charge it, and keep it with you. You can pick one up at sdp.io/E6N. The earlier Canon LP-E6 batteries without the N, they work just fine too. The new one is very slightly better in some way. I would caution you against buying the third-party batteries, because the Canon batteries are very expensive. And so we have bought every variation of third-party battery basically, and we've had terrible luck with all of them. They all work great for 6 months, 6 weeks, or maybe a couple of months, but at some point they will suddenly die. And maybe that's okay with you. Maybe it's worth that risk to save the extra money, but for us in our kind of like professional shooting that we do, we don't find it acceptable that a battery suddenly dies, so I recommend sticking with the Canon batteries. Let's talk about lenses. The lens I have attached here is the Canon 18-35. It's one of the 2 available kit lenses for this camera. There's also an 18-55, and I really love the 18-135. It's about as sharp as the shorter lens, and it takes up more space. But the ability to zoom all the way to 135 millimeters is fantastic. It makes it useful for things like sports and even like very light kind of wildlife style pictures. So this is my recommended lens for those who want one lens to do everything. Just get the 18-135 kit lens. You can pick it up at the link there. If you want sharper pictures, if you want to make nice big prints that are super sharp, for things like landscapes and events, those birthday parties, check out the Sigma 18-35 f1.8. It's by far the sharpest APS-C lens we've ever tested. By far. I promise you will see like 4 times more detail out of this lens than you will get out of your kit lens. Okay, maybe twice as much detail, but it's so much sharper it will blow your mind. And it's also, because it's an f1.8 lens, it will allow you to use a lower and lower ISO in low light environments. So you'll have like 8 times less noise, 8 times cleaner images. It's just a remarkable lens. It's also expensive, but it's a good deal. And there's no other lens that can match it. Not those f2.8 Canon zooms. No, this is the one lens. If you want something small and light, what we call a pancake lens, check out the 24mm f2.8. It's so small and light that it basically doesn't extend beyond the grip of the camera here. And that turns this whole thing into a really convenient camera that you can just take with you anywhere. It's not a zoom lens, it's a prime lens. You can't zoom it. It's kind of like your smartphone. It's about the same angle of view. But it will produce much better images than your smartphone, especially in low light conditions. This is a really nice lens and it's not at all expensive. If you want to go super wide, if you find that zooming all the way back to 18 millimeters isn't quite wide enough and you can't fit everything in, check out the Canon 10 to 18 millimeter, their stabilized version of that lens. It's really fantastic for travel. If you're going to Europe where the streets are really narrow, this is a must-have lens. If you're going to Yosemite or Glacier National Park where you're doing landscapes, this is a really useful lens. Or check out save yourself some money and check out chapter 2 of Stunning Digital Photography, and I show you how to shoot panoramas. It's a way to use software to work around not having a super wide angle lens. It can be a cheaper way to do things. If you get into portraiture, I'm going to suggest 2 lenses. One is the very inexpensive Canon 50mm f1.8, and it's just a great little lens. And it'll provide really nice background blur for things like headshots, and you pick them up for $100 or $120. Either the STM version or the non-STM version will work just fine. The STM version is very slightly better, but the non-STM version is a little bit cheaper. We like it a lot. There's a review of them on our channel. If you get serious about portraiture, or you want really sharp portraits, or even sport pictures, the Sigma 50-100 f1.8 is about to be released, and it looks just fantastic. I assume it's going to be as sharp as the 18-35 that they're known for. It's expensive, but it's far faster than anything that's available for APS-C, and that means you'll be getting better background blur with the versatility of a zoom. So do check it out at this link. It's a big piece of glass, and it's fantastically made. It's expensive, but those Sigma lenses are worth it. If you get into wildlife, my number 1 recommendation, especially bang for the buck, is the Canon 400mm f5.6. This is a big lens too. New, they're about $1,200 or $1,300, but I recommend picking up a used one for around $850 US or so, because they are built like a tank. They won't all have this camouflage cover. That's my own camouflage cover. But the lens itself is dramatically sharper than you will get out of your kit lens or one of those 75 or 70 to 300 millimeter zoom lenses. It's professional sharp. Like, you could sell your wildlife pictures that come out of this lens. It will last forever. I bought this one used, and I've had it for like 6 or 7 years, and it's still in perfect shape. So don't hesitate to save $300 and get one of the used ones, because they are indestructible and it's relatively light. Another option is the 100-400 zoom lens. It's the tiniest bit sharper. You probably won't notice the difference, but it does add image stabilization. It's also more than twice the price, I think, and it's actually a bit heavier, though it's a little compact. Anyway, it's another option for those who want the image stabilization that can reduce camera shake on your lens, or who want to be able to zoom in and out for things like sports and wildlife. It can kind of double as both. If you're shooting video, the number 1 accessory I recommend is to get a good microphone. And the on-camera mic will suck, and if you put one of those shotgun mics on top of the camera, that's not going to be good either. What we use is a lav mic. I have one attached to my lapel here, and that's why we have good sound, and that's why the sound from the on-camera mic probably sounds terrible. They're not inexpensive, though. You can easily spend $700 or $800 on mics like this. It's just that if you're doing professional video, it's going to be worth it to you. We use the Sennheiser EW100 G3s. After pretty carefully comparing lots of different mics, this is what we settled on. We've used it for as long as we've been around, so for a long time now. Pick it up at sdp.io/G3, or save yourself some money and go to eBay and look for the EW100 G2 versions of this mic. You can get them for much cheaper, and they basically have the same audio quality. Just be sure the mic here wears out on a regular basis, so if you do pick up a used one, you might have to replace the Sennheiser ME2 mic. It can be a good reason to buy yourself a new one instead of trying to find a used one, since the mic, if it flakes out, it could ruin your whole shoot. If you're looking to get prints made, if you actually want to decorate your wall, something I highly recommend, check out our video here at sdp.io/printit. We compare print services from around the US just to find the one that provides the highest quality prints for the best value. If you want a tripod, I suggest a starter tripod at $50. You can definitely spend more on a tripod, But this is a tripod that's going to be enough for most people, and it's really versatile. And even if you decide you want a higher end tripod later, this ends up being a great compact, lightweight travel tripod. Check it out at sdp.io/tripod1. If you're looking for a flash, this isn't the exact model, but it's a very similar model. The Yongnuo YN568EX2 is just about as capable as the Canon flashes and much, much less expensive. Literally, the Canon flash that's equivalent to this is like $500 or something like that. And this is right around $100. And we use them all the time. They seem to be equally reliable. We've had some of these fail, but we've had some of the Canon flashes fail too. And you could buy 4 or 5 of these for the price of one Canon flash. So buy a couple and keep a backup in your bag if you absolutely need to. If you want an SD card, here's a link that will take you to the Amazon page for SD cards. I mentioned earlier, if you shoot continuously a lot, you'll want a fast SD card. Otherwise, spend your money on getting a bigger SD card. 128 gigs, 256 gigs isn't too much. It just means you can shoot with it for months or a year without having to format your card. That means you can quickly show your pictures to your friends on your camera. You don't have to worry about running out of space, and you always have a backup in your camera in case your computer fails or something. I'll also recommend going to this link and buying 3 or 4 really cheap SD cards, like $10 SD cards. Get 8 gigabyte cards. You can get them for $4 or $5 even. Take those cards, put one in your purse or your wife's purse, put one in your glove box of your car, put one in your jacket pocket, put one in your suitcase. Spread them all around. Anything you might have when you're out and about taking pictures, because the worst thing that can happen to you is you're out shooting and you run out of space. Or you're out shooting and you realize you forgot your SD card. So buy cheap ones, spread them around, and then when you don't have it, you'll be like, oh, thank God, Tony told me to buy a cheap card. This cheap card is better than nothing. Put it in there and you'll be ready to go. Another tip is when you do take your SD card out, leave this door open here. And don't close it until after you put your SD card back in. That way, if your SD card isn't in there and you close the door, you're going to grab your camera and head out for a day of shooting and realize you don't have your SD card. So never close an empty door. Leave it open until you're ready to go. One last plug for my books and video training. All of these include hours and hours of video. Stunning Digital Photography teaches you all the really important things about photography, the art, the storytelling, composition, lighting, mood, timing, expression, posing. All this stuff is far more important than the camera settings. I'd rather have you stay on auto and learn all those other things about photography. It's $10. It's way cheaper than this camera. So go do check it out. It's the #1 selling photography book in the world. Just read reviews on Amazon, even if you decide not to buy it. It will really speed up your picture taking process and help really improve the quality of your pictures. A Lightroom book, I mentioned Lightroom's kind of the best software for organizing and editing your pictures. If you get deep into Photoshop and you want to learn how to make portraits look awesome and stuff, I have a book on that. You can pick all this up at sdp.io/store, a book dedicated to choosing your gear, which can easily pay for itself by helping you choose the right gear instead of the wrong gear and helping you buy used instead of new. And finally, if you hate books and you don't want to read anything, I have a whole video training series that's only video. Thanks so much. Do share this with your friends. Send them to sdp.io/tutorials for other cameras. And if you found this helpful, give me a like. Subscribe to this channel to see more free videos. And if you have any questions, give me a comment down below. Thanks so much.